Chairman, we're live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Environment Advisory Group. I'm Councillor Stuart Gawley. I'm the portfolio holder for Environment and Highways and the chairman of the Environment Advisory Group. The members joining me this evening are, so I've got a few on my list, but I don't see them yet. So I've got Councillor Carolyn Culver in the room and Councillor Martha Vickers in the room. And Councillor Richard Sumner and Councillor Adrian Abbs is joining us as well. And then we are, sorry, there's a few others we were expecting that aren't here yet. So I'll move on to the next chunk, which are the meeting is supported by officers Kofi Adujiamfi, who's the Surface Lead for Climate Change, John Winstanley, Jenny Graham, Emily Ashton Jelly, Thomas Radbourne, the clerk of the meeting, and Sam Chiverton, who's our Zoom host this evening. We've also got a couple of presenters joining us this evening, and that's Bridget Fox from the Woodland Trust and also Dr. Pat Watson. So thank you both for joining us. And for members of the public watching today, thank you very much for coming along or having a look back at this after the meeting. So in terms of housekeeping, if we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route. There are a couple of fire exits over in the far corner. There's also one, the main room when you came in, and also one over in the corner here next to my right. And the assembly point is the car park in the back of the Dolphin pub. And if the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await for instructions from officers, and we'll adjourn the meeting until such a time as it's safe to proceed. Excellent, cool. Okay, so the first item of the agenda proper is apologies. I've got two apologies from Councillor Bennyworth and Councillor Jeffrey. And I've also got apologies from officers Adrian Slaughter and Daniel Warm. However, we are missing a few others from this evening that we would expect to see here, so hopefully they will join at some point in the near future. Marvellous. Okay, over to item 2, which is minutes of the previous EAG Open Forum, which was the 25th of November 2024. It seems about 7 months ago now, I must admit. I know January is a long month, but it certainly does feel a lot longer. So anyone got any comments on the minutes of the last meeting? No. Cool. Okay. In that case, I'm happy to propose. If there's a seconder, Martha, all those in favour? Good. Excellent. Thank you. In that case, do you want me to sign those off? Yes, please. Thank you very much. Cool. Marvellous. That takes me swiftly on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations of interest around the room? No? Perfect. Nice. In that case, it takes us to item 4, which is woodland conservation and restoration. So I'd like to invite Bridget Fox from the Woodland Trust to make your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Chair and Councillors, and I will attempt to share my screen. This did work earlier in dress rehearsal. Of course, now is the actual, here we are, share, proof of the pudding, and so on. Okay, that looks okay to me. Does that look okay to you? I shall proceed. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you this evening about protecting and restoring trees and woodland. There is a whole lot of things I could talk about on this topic, but I'm particularly going to focus on things that are kind of within the local authority remit and scope, and perhaps civic society more generally, rather than say what we would advise if I was talking to landowners specifically. But if there are any other issues I raise that you want to explore in Q&A or after this, don't feel bound by the limits I've set on what I cover. Second bit of health warning is it's a long presentation. I'm not going to go through it all in detail. That's primarily so that you will have it as a resource afterwards when the slides are shared. And so I can go back to something if it's appropriate to answer a question this evening. So don't worry, you're not going to be sitting through a 40-minute keynote speech or anything. So I will zoom through this, no pun intended, but if there's anything you want to explore at any stage, just say. So just a couple of words about the Woodland Trust. We're the UK's longest established and leading woodland conservation charity. We're over 50 years old now, and we operate nationwide with estates in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We only actually have one estate in the county of Berkshire, and it's not in West Berkshire. But we work nationwide, whether or not we have estates in a particular area. And in terms of our work with local authorities, it's very much around the policy advocacy on how to protect and restore woodlands, to get more trees planted in the right place for nature recovery and climate resilience, and to improve awareness of and access to trees and woodland for everyone. And I'm sure I don't need to tell this group the many benefits of trees and woodland, but we could not live without them. We tend to take them for granted as part of the British and particularly English landscape and culture, but they have a very important day-to-day role as a natural carbon capture and storage mechanism, as well as all the benefits they provide for nature and for human well-being. And the nature piece is really important because we are a country facing a nature crisis. A lot of local authorities have already declared climate emergencies. An increasing number are now declaring nature or ecological or biodiversity crises as well, because we are losing nature at an alarming rate. And while there's a range of factors affecting that, one of the most serious is the loss of the quantity and degradation of the quality of habitat, including, but not exclusively, woodland. And ancient woodland is the land that has only ever been woodland pretty much since the end of the Ice Age. It was comprehensively mapped in 1600. So I used to say from the reign of Elizabeth I to Elizabeth II, and now I add and beyond. But maps were comprehensively done in about 1600, and anything that was already wooded then had probably always been wooded, because although we'd already begun to fell woodland by then for housing, fuel, shipbuilding and so on, there hadn't been large-scale woodland, new woodland planting. So anything that was wooded in 1600 probably always been wooded and hopefully still wooded today. But it's now, instead of being the majority land use in the country, it's very much a minority land use. On average, less than 3% of UK's land mass. In fact, probably less than 3% in England, because there's quite a lot of woodland elsewhere. And West Berkshire is quite typical in that you've got very few large agglomerations of woodland. It is very much these precious patches, which makes them even more vulnerable. And so it's really important that you know what you've got and work to protect it. And the good news is that your draft local plan, currently to examination in public, has some really, really good words on it on ancient woodland. It's got the standard wording from the NPPF on ancient woodland protection, which is part of the given. But in the narrative accompanying that policy, there's a really good overview of ancient woodland in your district. So I don't need to add to that. Your officers have already got this covered, and hopefully this will survive examination in public. But I would just say, kudos to West Berkshire for spelling it out, what you've got and why it matters in your local plan. But just to refer back to the NPPF, which those of you on planning committees will know is what has to shape ultimately shape your decisions. Ancient woodland is defined as an irreplaceable habitat. So are ancient and veteran trees outside woods. And they have, in terms of local developments, absolute protection. It's always a balancing act, but we would say absolute protection. The difficult exception is for infrastructure projects, which would be determined directly by the planning inspectorate, things like railway lines, power stations, bits of motorway and so on. I suspect this part of the world has had its battles on road building, lost in the mists of time now. Hopefully you won't be facing any new threats of that kind. But that's where sometimes the Woodland Trust and other allies have to actually take a stand to make the case for ancient woodland. And we're expecting some big decisions this week from government on airport expansion, potentially on new motorways, and we will be watching those very closely to see that ancient woodland, which is irreplaceable, is not lost. But it's not just about direct loss. Nowadays, the most of the battle is around what we call edge effects. And this, sorry, it looks slightly blurry on the presentation, but I can share a proper link afterwards. This is a spread from our Planner's Manual for Ancient Woodland, one of the Woodland Trust's guidance notes. And it shows all the what we call the edge effects that impact ancient woodlands. So ancient woodlands are that bit in the middle. And even though that might not be built on, you've got all these other land uses around it that can adversely affect it, including some that you might think were quite benign uses in the countryside, like agriculture or camping or golf courses. Depending on how the land is managed and what activities take place on it, those can have an adverse impact on ancient woodland. So we're always very keen to say that it's properly buffered, and that if you have land uses that could affect the ancient woodland, that there is perhaps an additional buffer there. And again, we're really pleased to see in your draft plan a requirement to do impact assessments for any ammonia emitting, hard to say, ammonia emitting developments, such as intensive agriculture, where the ammonia could affect the ancient woodland. Sometimes we hear from developers or from anyone, often through ignorance rather than malice, that something might be ancient woodland on maps, but the trees there don't look particularly ancient, and it doesn't appear to have a great deal of natural nature to enjoy. The bluebells are long since gone. But in fact, PAWS, plantation on ancient woodland sites, often perhaps ex-Forestry Commission land or land in private ownership, has effectively been farmed for timber by growing and then felling trees in quick succession, still has the same protection because the value is in the soil, which has only ever been woodland soil. And the condition is irrelevant, just as if you have a listed building and you let it fall into disrepair. That doesn't allow you to make it easier for you to demolish it. Similarly, protected woodland is protected woodland. And to know how to protect stuff, you have to know where it is. And this, I'm going to show you a snapshot of this map, but if you click on the link, if you bring it up at your leisure, or even if you want while I'm speaking, you get a live interactive map. And this is DEFRA's platform called Magic Maps. And there's all sorts of wonderful stuff around the natural environment on here, including a habitat layer. So if you go into the drop-down menu, you'll see habitats, then woodland, and then you can tick the box for ancient woodland. And it will show you where your ancient woodland is. And this is an example of what it looks like. And this was the largest agglomeration of ancient woodland I could find on the map in your district. So you can probably recognise the M4 across the sort of top third of the map there. And just below it, you've got this marvellous arc of woodland around, I think it's a place called Hermitage. You all know it better than I. The green hatching is for the ancient semi-natural woodland. That's your bluebell woods. And then the orange horizontal hatching is your plantation on ancient woodland site, which may be superficially variable quality, but has that same standing. And you'll see that the two patches often join up. If you look to the left of, is it the Cheveley Junction? Anyway, the left of that big junction, you'll see there's a little clutch there at Busset Wood, which is a mixture of ancient and plantation on ancient soil, because it would have been 1.1 woodland, and some of it's been managed differently over the centuries, but it all has the same standing. So if you know what you've got, you can better protect it. When it comes to ancient and veteran trees outside woods, it's not as clear because they're not mapped comprehensively on the ancient woodland inventory. Instead, it's the ancient tree inventory, which the Woodland Trust holds, populated by a fantastic army of citizen scientists. New recruits always welcome. We had an assessment done of our work to date by a doctoral student who reckoned that we had only, although we've mapped 200,000 trees, which is great, with some in-depth sampling of typical habitats across the country, she reckoned there were actually probably 2 million, or should be 2 million, ancient or veteran trees. So we've got a long way to go to map them all. And we have a searchable map which you can look up, and then we also have an interactive data layer which you can export and use if that's helpful to you. We really want this to be a resource everyone can use. There's some licensing issues about commercial usage, as you might expect, but apart from that, it's there for you. And an example of what it looks like, again, this is in the district. That's the road coming away from Great Shefford, which is sort of at the top of the screen, slightly off centre to the left. And RAF Welford, they're very distinctive in the top right-hand corner. And those blobs are individual ancient, veteran or notable trees. Notable trees are ones which have some visual significance and probably will become ancient or veteran if they survive, which have been mapped by our volunteers and then verified by our expert verifiers. And you'll see that these are often following ancient road lines, river lines, hedge lines, and so on. One of the things I love about the ATI map is it also has an historic layer. So if you look at the same place historically, no M4 in the bottom right-hand corner, that's gone. Certainly no RAF Welford. In fact, Welford Wood, no longer with us. And I suspect that RAF Welford may not be a prime site for new woodland creation at the moment. Who knows what may happen in the future. But certainly if you're looking at where to plant new woodland or where your priorities are for woodland protection restoration, those historic wood areas, which now may have some isolated historic trees, are a good starting point. And if you take one thing away from my talk today, please let it be that we need to map our ancient trees outside woods, because although they have equal planning protection to ancient woodland, if we haven't mapped them, it's very hard to protect them. And protecting ancient woodland is a good thing in itself, but it also contributes to wider policy goals. And 2024, 2025, very much the year of nature recovery. And you may have heard of the local nature recovery strategy, a requirement coming out of the last Environment Act that every county should have one. They've been called a BAP plus a MAP, for those of you who remember the old biodiversity action plans, because they are a narrative prioritisation, a spatial account of what you've got in terms of nature, and then a mapping of the priorities for protecting, connecting and enhancing those habitats. And we would say that woods and trees are very much the spine of your nature recovery network, because so many other species and habitats are dependent on them. And the Berkshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy will be going out for public consultation in the first half of this year. So that's definitely one to look out for. Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead's the lead scribe of it, if you like. They've been, but it's very much a cooperative effort across all the councils in Berkshire. And with local government reorganisation on the cards, we and the other ENGOs like BBOUT are really, really keen that these local nature recovery strategies are robustly in place, so that whatever form of government is we end up with, there's a clear plan for protecting and enhancing our natural environment. And some of that is about having more trees in the right place. It's great to protect what we've got, but we need more. We have the lowest, as well as one being the most nature depleted country in Europe, we also have the lowest tree cover. So our records are not happy ones on this front. And the Woodland Trust has signed up saying that we really need to get that cover up, average cover up to 20%. It's very patchy across the country. Some places have more, some have less. That's the nature of averages. My cat and I have an average of 3 legs. Neither of us has precisely 3 legs. So we would like to see 20% as a floor that everyone gets up to, rather than simply the average. London has an average tree cover of 20%, but there are many places in London with very poor tree cover, sometimes as low as 1%. So averages are merely a guide and a driver of activity. But they're a good one to have. And we're not, the government has set targets, the UK Committee on Climate Change has set targets, and there's a lot of numbers being bandied around. But we would just say, just take away that we need more. We need more. And we need it in the right place. There are other habitats that are of value, and you wouldn't want to be degraded by planting woodland in the wrong place. I don't think you've got much peat here, but peat's one example, chalk grasslands is another, and so on. And being guided by where trees used to be is a good guide. When it comes to urban areas, we'd say just cram them in wherever you can, but go for an appropriate size of tree. The Victorians loved planting great big London planes along residential streets, and now 100, 150 years on, sometimes they're not the best neighbours, beautiful though they are. So compact urban trees with sufficient room to spread and grow, but they will absolutely be the best investment you can make in a resilient public realm for the future. And local authorities have a crucial role to play in identifying where they could go. And the NPPF, back to that, also encourages urban trees. So, you can really push for developers to supply these, to protect the ones they've got and plant more in the right place, whether that's on their own land or whether that's contributing through Section 106 or Community Infrastructure Levy to trees in the public realm. And increasingly, there's interest when you look at where trees should go in urban areas in what we call tree equity. Quite often, it can be a bit of a tale of two cities, that you'll have people who already live in leafy streets, which can be a synonym for affluence, who love their trees and want more of them. But the people who are the most deprived of tree cover may also be deprived of other things as well. And asking for more trees may not be top of their priority list if they're grappling with a whole range of issues around, social care, special educational needs, worried about being evicted, whatever it might be. And so increasingly, we are looking at helping local leaders identify where trees are most needed, not just on the basis of who shouts for them most. And the UK Tree Equity Score maps woodland cover across a range of social and economic factors. It's only for urban areas, so this is pretty much the only bit of West Berkshire that's been covered for now. It may roll out to smaller towns, but the clue's in the name. It's an urban thing. But it shows those super output areas, which I think are even smaller than wards, so maybe about polling districts. I'm not exactly certain how they map over to your boundaries. But the greener it is, the more sorted you are already for trees, and the more orange it is, the more need there is for more trees. And again, you can dip into that and see the numbers that underpin each of those scores. And I've had people look at this and say, oh, I know why that's orange. That's, where the business park is or something like that. There's a big orange blot on the west side of London, which at first glance might look ripe for woodland creation. Of course, it's Heathrow Airport. So you have to ground truth it a bit. But these dusters give you a bit of a steer as to where trees might be needed. And we'd say make sure you plant the right trees in terms of their sourcing as well. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you about ash dieback, which is destroying our native ash trees and causing huge costs to local authorities in the course of that, because you have a duty to keep your highways safe. Like Dutch elm disease a generation before, that was caused by an imported disease or pest. I think ash dieback is a disease, but some of them are caused by pests. From the trees' point of view, they don't care whether it's pest or disease, the problems are the same. And so having biosecure procurement, where you at least quarantine imports or preferably source your tree stock domestically, is a good way to go. And that can tie into things like creating green jobs. Tree nurseries are fabulous hands-on jobs, can't be exported, a wide range of skills, don't need much land to operate successfully. They're a good thing to have. I've put in a summary slide of all our current policy asks of local authorities. I won't go through it all, but I have to put that in there for you. Obviously, some of this is already being addressed through your local plan. I know that you've got tree planting in your climate action plan and so on. But if any of these ring bells and you want to come back and discuss them further, then please do so. And although we're very keen to tell you what you should be doing or thinking about, we don't leave you unsupported. The Woodland Trust has a range of funding scheme for landowners, public and private, to plant trees and woodland. So that can be creating new woodland or new hedges through our More Woods and More Hedges schemes. There are also government funding schemes available through the England Woodland Creation Offer, but ours is separate and additional to that. And we also offer agroforestry schemes, so where you keep your land as a working farm for livestock or crops, but you can increase the percentage of trees on there. So it doesn't have to be either or. We do free tree packs for everyone except commercial entities and principal local authorities, but you can signpost it to community groups, schools and so on, parishes in your area. And we have a range of citizen science and educational projects as well, which we're really always happy to promote. They're free of charge and they can be a great sort of low-hanging fruit thing for a local authority to promote if you don't have a huge amount of resource to spend on this area yourself, including the Ancient Tree Inventory, which is my message of the day. So that's a whistle-stop tour. Very, very interested to hear what you think, answer any questions you may have either now or at a future date. But I know you've got a long evening ahead of you, so thank you for listening. I'll return the screen to you now, and welcome any comments you may have.
Thank you very much, Bridget, for that. It's fantastic and really interesting to look at some of those tools that are available. But I've got a couple of quick questions that I will lead on, if that's okay, before I bring in anybody else. Quick question. Planning, it's not one of my strong points, if I'm honest. If trees aren't mapped, you talk about the ancient tree, sorry. If they're not mapped and then they are found to be ancient specimens, is that something that can be protected retrospectively when it comes to things like development, or do they need to have been recognised, logged and registered with the local authority prior to that planning app or development?
Yes, I mean, their value, there is intrinsic quality that they are ancient or better, and therefore they have that protection. But clearly it's easier to uphold it if you're aware of it at the time. And certainly we would suggest that planning committees and planning officers might, if a development site is coming forward, might want to condition having an ancient tree survey of that site before precise locations of built elements within the site were determined, if it's a larger site, and so on, and designating root protection areas, which actually there are standards around, which are standard conditions normally in planning applications, that root protection areas are designated for any trees of value. And many of you will be familiar with tree preservation orders, TPOs, which automatically apply in conservation areas and can be applied whatever the status of a tree if it has urban landscape significance. But it's all about its visual significance. It's not about its intrinsic merit. So if it's not visible from the public realm, it can't get protected by a TPO, which is frustrating. Right. So yeah, there's a number of routes to go, but we feel the ancient tree inventory is perhaps an underknown resource, so that's why we bang on about it.
And actually, just quickly on that topic of the ATI, is that available to all? Is that something that we can look at and use as part of, if we don't already, things like planning, things like our own projects, our own inventory of what's going on? It's something that we can look at, any member of the public can look at as well?
Yeah, so there's the website I showed, which is the one that you can look things up on and upload individual records to, and then there's a GIS layer which you can actually download and do mapping stuff with.
Marvellous, thank you. Councillor Abbs, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I had to come off mute, won't be a second. Yeah, thanks very much. A little bit more on planning, I'm afraid. We have a thing called Sandalford, which it's all a bit late now, but I was curious as to what, why you guys changed your guidance on the root systems, because it essentially meant that we've now got a 15-metre kind of padding around the ancient woodlands at Sandalford, rather than the 50 or 100 metres that a lot of us thought was more kind of realistic in terms of, especially when we start to talk about animals that then invade the ancient woodland as soon as you build houses next to them, and so on and so forth. So I'm curious as to why you guys didn't stick with the much larger root system number and why you've gone back to 15 metres.
Yes, I mean, it's a good question. The Woodland Trust advocates a minimum of 50 metre buffers for ancient woodland, and that continues to be our policy ask. But the standing guidance from Natural England is 15 metres, so that's the statutory requirement. So our ask hasn't changed, but we've never managed to get it adopted, unfortunately, as statutory requirement, which is 15 metres. What I would say is that increasingly we're seeing councils more aware of pressure on nature, and currently the Isle of Wight plan
sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, but councils aren't going to help you here. It's unless you've got something in the NPPF or something, councils have no power whatsoever. We've got this one thing which is 15 metres, and that's become the default for ancient woodland now, which is horrific. To trying to preserve it with all those edge effects on the slide you were showing earlier. So I don't know what power you've got, but we've got zero to protect. So can you not, is there no movement at all in your side to get this back to, or get a 50 metre adopted properly?
Yeah, so sorry, as I was saying, there are some local authorities that have set higher in their local plans and got them adopted. So Vale of Aylesbury, which is now part of Bucks Unitary, they haven't yet done an early outlier in going unitary county in the southeast. Bucks has not yet got a single county-wide plan. It still has its district plans in place, and Vale of Aylesbury has a 50-metre buffer in its local plan. So we are keen to see that that survives into the whole of Bucks local plan.
Sorry, is that an adopted local plan?
Adopted local plan, been through examination in public. And Isle of Wight is currently going through EIP, and Lewis is at draft consultation, both with 50-metre buffers in. And there are other councils which have done between the 15 and the 50 metres. In fact, your own draft plan says, although it sticks to the 15-metre statutory, it does say it will look at sites on a case-by-case basis and may require larger buffers in some cases. So we welcome that ambition.
Okay, thank you.
Go for it, Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you very much. You said about the recommendation for the 20% of agricultural land being set aside for trees. I mean, what's the presumably is a trade-off with agriculture, and how does that work? And sorry, there's a second question, which is quite large areas of the country don't seem to be covered by the survey, including, I mean, not just rural areas. Certainly, my patch doesn't have the survey. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but you presumably know that the website that I've just looked on the website, the tree equity score. I mean, yeah. Thank you.
So it's just to answer the second one first. The UK Tree Equity Score is a new product from the Woodland Trust that is just looking at urban areas. But there is something called the iTree Canopy Cover Map, which is held by Forest Research, which covers a wider area. And that, again, was populated by a mixture of volunteer and sponsored projects. So it's not universal. Depends where it was done, but it covers a wider area than our Tree Equity Score. But it doesn't have that extra social dimension. So it's a bit suck it and see. But actually, one of the good things about things like drones and so on, it's actually getting much easier now to map canopy cover remotely without a lot of labour-intensive work, which is, the expensive bit is sending people out to measure these things. So we hope to see canopy cover mapping more universal. So that was the second bit. On the first bit, the UK Committee on Climate Change produced a land use report. I think it's updated it since, which was the one that said that 20%. So it would still leave 80% of agricultural land for livestock or crops, but climate change is a critical threat to everyone's survival. So yes, we need food security, but we also need security full stop, and being climate resilient is part of that.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you. Thank you for that interesting presentation. Yes, I mean, it's fascinating hearing about the ancient woodlands and the quantity we've got. And I'm sure lots of other people would like to know where these ancient woodlands are and would like to access information, because it's you go out walking and you see interesting trees, but to know a little bit more about what they are and how old they might be would be really interesting. Yes, I was going to ask about the urban environment, and you mentioned the importance of trees there and the fact that we've lost a lot because maybe the wrong trees were planted some time ago. I'm a bit concerned that we don't have enough urban trees locally, and there are areas. And it's one of the questions you get asked quite a lot: is can we have more trees, in our high street or locally, because it improves the look of the area as well as sort of going forward, we're going to need shade for people walking around. So do you give advice, encouragement to local authorities about planting urban trees? Do you sort of are quite active in that, are you?
Yes, we are. And we're increasingly, because 80% of people live in urban areas, we're increasingly, and including our members and supporters, we're increasingly looking at the urban space. There are some other tree charities which are even more focused on the urban realm because we're more about woodlands, so trees at scale. So people like Trees for Cities, for example, do a lot in urban areas and have formed some very successful partnerships with local authorities where residents can fund the cost of new street trees, for example. But increasingly with requirements for things like biodiversity net gain, we're seeing developers wanting to see how they can make contributions. And trees are quite a popular, as long in the right place, uncontroversial option and a very, very good investment. So Yeah, and as I say, we give away free trees. The free trees we give away are the whips, the saplings, so they're not instantly going to be big leafy street trees, but they're very easy to plant in a number of environments. They're great for school groups and so on. So they're a starting point, but there are also other suppliers who will give you bigger street trees as well. There's various partnerships out there, and always happy to explore options with you outside the meeting.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I should have declared an interest. Actually, I'm a member of the Woodland Trust. I know you do give away lots and lots of saplings. Do you keep a record of where they end up? I suspect that's quite a difficult task because you give so many away. But I'm aware, I mean, I was out tree planting in my secondary school today. And I'm aware there's so many initiatives that are going on around the country. There's probably a lot more stuff happening than any of us is aware of because it's just impossible to keep tabs on. So I just wondered if you are able to gather all of that information about newly planted stuff and feed that into the nature recovery networks.
So we kind of supply trees through 3 routes. There's our partnerships with landowners where we have pretty good tabs on which trees have gone where. Our free tree giveaways, we know where they were sent to, but beyond that, they're a free giveaway, so we can't put a lot of staff resource into. We do some sample testing, but basically we trust people to plant them where they said they would, and we hope that they'll survive. And then there's trees from our tree shop, which we literally have no idea where they've gone because, you know, I could buy a tree and then give it to someone for Christmas and it ends up somewhere completely different. So we try and track. There have been a number of counties and other local authorities, but I'm thinking particularly of big counties like Kent and Surrey, who set numerical tree planting targets and are trying now desperately to track whether they're actually meeting them or not. And it's surprisingly hard, which is why we think that canopy cover can be a more effective mechanism because that's tracking what you've actually got and it values the trees you've already got and the contribution they make. So it's about the impact rather than the activity. But yes, we're keen that our trees do get a good home.
And just one other point, is building on what you asked about, Chairman, with the tree preservation orders. I would hope and assume that our tree officers look at the inventory that the Woodland Trust have to make sure that that matches up with their own mapping. Could we make that an action point just to double check that that definitely happens?
Yeah, I think it's a really good shout, to be honest.
Yeah, I would assume the tree preservation officers know it exists and look at it regularly, but you never know.
Never make assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool, excellent. Yeah, I had one more question actually before we wrap up. Have you had any examples where you've tried to, I say rewild, but replant more trees that's met resistance or negative stories or headlines, if you will? And if so, I don't know how have you managed to overcome those? I'll explain why once you've answered the question.
Thankfully fewer than they used to be, I think, because I think awareness of a sort of the rich mix of habitats rather than just a sort of drive for tree planting come what may, which I think was perhaps more of a thing decades ago. I mean, historically, there were some problems, not with the Woodland Trust making, but there were some cases where, you know, good quality other habitats were perhaps degraded by trees being planted on them. Peat being an example. That's not something we would ever have done, but I think it has happened in the past. And now people are much more savvy, I think, about that. There was a case, I think, I can't remember exactly which town, I wasn't here, where a community group planted trees on a gap between two modern urban extensions. And then afterwards they realised why there was a gap. There was a high pressure gas main or something, and the saplings had to be removed again very, very carefully. So you do have to be, you know, it makes sense to think about where you plant things. And there have been cases where, you know, coastal towns traditionally have very, very low tree cover because people like their views of the sea and they don't particularly want that taken away by lots of tree planting. So a lot of it's very contextual. But I think generally now people are seeing, and, you know, places where you wouldn't have had trees before, car parks is a classic example. We wouldn't want, you know, leaves falling on their cars or birds depositing on their cars. But now we're increasingly seeing ground car parks, level car parks, having trees in them because they provide that vital shelter and shade given the extreme weather we're facing. So, you know, views are changing and in a pro-tree way.
It's interesting. I mean, excuse me. The reason I asked that question is because we've got a couple of projects at the moment ongoing where we've actively removed tarmac in terms of some rain gardens and the Peace Garden over at the wharf where we've taken car park spaces away, and they've been received quite negatively, I would say, from sectors of the public. And I think it's got me working out how do we pitch it better next time when we do these activities. And I wonder whether a lot of the time is actually because we're a local authority, people think we should be spending council tax in different ways, even though the funding wasn't from council tax for these initiatives. But the perception there is, why are you wasting that but not filling my pothole? I look after highways as well, so it's another cause close to my heart. And it's just interesting to hear, actually, because I think we do need to do more of this, but for me, it's around how do we make that change process better, and what can we learn as a local authority from a comms perspective, from an education perspective, from organisations like yourself that do this a lot more often and on a lot bigger scale. That was the reason for my question, and I think it's really important we nail that education piece next time to promote that we're doing the right thing, but in a slightly different way, in the urban environment in particular, those two examples. So thank you for that. It's really, really good. Oh, yeah, Councillor Abbs and...
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry for coming back for a second bite at the cherry here. I did put something in the chat, typed rather badly, I see, but it was about, because you started talking about an urban focus, and of course we can't put trees on every road or every street. However, we've got an awful lot of buildings with flat roofs and the like, and what work is the Woodland Trust doing in those kind of areas? Beautifying some of the ugly buildings that we've got, which, to be honest, if my preference would be to knock them down, but we're not going to get that. So how do we kind of get, how do we get some of that value that we get from a tree into the urban environment?
Yes, I shall have to make sure I stay within the remit of the Woodland Trust and not comment on the merits of the built environment too much. Whatever my personal views might be, but everyone loves something. We would see trees as being part of that green infrastructure network, that green and blue infrastructure network in towns. And you're right, a tree won't be suitable for every space, and it wouldn't be fair on the tree, frankly, in some spaces. You do see some which are basically in concrete tombs and it's not appropriate. But there are things like urban hedgerows, rain gardens, as have been mentioned, bioswales, green and walls, green and brown roofs, and so on. So if you have that integrated green infrastructure networks threading through your more built environment areas and reconnecting your larger areas of green and blue space, then that can be very powerful. We're hearing about things like decline the hedgehog because those traditional corridors just aren't there. I'm not suggesting they're going to leap from rooftop to rooftop, but the same principle applies. That if you can get more nature-friendly environments into the built environment, whether they're trees or something more site-specific, then that is a good thing.
Thank you. Marvellous. Susan. If you just use your mic, Susan, yeah. Oh, that's got no battery in it. There's one, there's just one. Just there, actually. It's got no battery, that's all. Here we go. Might be just easier to use that one in the middle. Might be easier just to use that one, because that one's going to take a bit of time to get going. It's all right. We're just going to switch over to this one because it's ready to go, this one. Sorry. It's just otherwise people at home can't hear, that's all.
Hello, Bridget. Can you give any sense of the Woodland Trust thinking about moving towards more Mediterranean species with climate change, or widening the range of species that are planted? We've had projects that I've been working on have had tree packs from yourselves, and it's great. They're native British trees, which is what we want. But obviously we need to be looking at future proofing.
This is a hotly contested topic in the tree world at the moment, so thank you for asking that. The sort of Forestry Commission guidance is that you should go for an 80-20 mix, so 80% native and up to 20% non-native. We advocate for 100% native because we, as a nature conservation-led charity, we recognise the role that woodland habitat provides in supporting other wildlife species and creating secondary habitats, whether that's, you know, fungal or and contributing to that other citizen science project, Nature's Calendar, maps the impact of climate change on things like bud time and grub time and blossom time and egg laying time, and how that's now becoming disrupted with climate change, and actually having those reliable native species for food and for shelter is increasingly important because of climate change, we would say. And, you know, the trees were here before us, hopefully they'll be here after us. We need to give them the opportunity to adapt over the centuries. In a town setting, if people want to plant a more exotic species for variety, you know, you're sick of flowering cherries and rowan, you want something else, or there's a, you know, a memorial or ceremonial aspect to it, you know, you want to plant something from your twin town or whatever, that's fine. But certainly for landscape scale, nature recovery, creating new woodland, we would say the best way to create new woodland, frankly, is natural regeneration. Just throw out a fence from the existing woodland boundary and see what grows. You're not going to get any exotic species that way, but you will get what, you know, the current climate best supports. So we would say native is best, but 80-20 is the official government position.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you ever so much, Bridget, for coming along to present tonight. It really is interesting. I think we are lucky in West Berks that we've got such a green area, but it's always good to know what else we can do and the right way to do it. Like you say, you know, choosing the right tree, right place, I think was critical. And I've written that down to remind me, because I think people can just go, yeah, it's green, it will be fine, and then go crazy. And then, like you say, end up with someone where I live, we've got a massive great Acer in the back garden, and it must be hundreds of years old, but it's crazy now, and it's beautiful, but probably not the right tree for now. And but there we go. But it's a good lesson to learn. Cool, marvellous. Thank you ever so much. So with that, we're going to move on to item 5. Which is the environment strategy refresh and a discussion. And so I'd like to hand over to Jenny Graham, who's our environment delivery manager at West Berks, to make their presentation. Evening, Jenny.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me. I have got some slides that I will now share and just take you through. Okay, is that coming up?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Okay, let's try again. Okay, is that coming up?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, great. I'm just going to give you a bit of an update as to where we are on the environment strategy refresh. My aim for this evening, and I will try not to go on for too long, my aim is just to have a little bit of a recap on the drivers and why we are refreshing the environment strategy at this point, and a little bit of a recap on the information that I shared back in July when I did another item on this refresh right at the beginning of the process, which I won't expect you all to remember at all. So I'll outline a bit of a refresh on that. I want to then focus in on 2 of the key things that we are doing through this refresh. One is looking at the delivery plan in particular, and the other is looking at the pathway, our pathway to net zero as a council, and just the sorts of things we're looking at for that. I will update you on the timings for getting the refresh to executive, and then there'll be a little bit of time for some questions and any feedback. So the drivers for us refreshing the strategy, I did cover this in July, but just as a bit of a reminder, obviously we've had a new administration since the environment strategy was first published in July 2020. Other new things that have happened, we have declared the ecological emergency to add to our climate emergency declaration. There are now, we're operating in a different financial climate. to when the original environment strategy was published, so it's important to consider that. Also, we've had a lot of learning since we started to implement the environment strategy, so it's good to take stock and reflect on that as well. And we are halfway there at 2025 to our 2030 target. We've also got a new challenge of addressing nutrient neutrality in the district in the Lambourn catchment area. And the Environment Act has come in, which introduces a range of new things, including new biodiversity duty for local authorities. So lots of things that are driving us to just have a bit of a refresh of the strategy. So when I presented to the Open Forum in July, I touched on what the strategy would include, what its purpose was. So as well as those drivers, there were some key elements that we were looking to include. These were a light touch review of progress, consideration of the journey we're on, and a detailed look at our pathway to net zero, which I'll touch on more later, and a bit of an honest consideration of our priorities against resources, and how that would lead to a revised delivery plan. The refocusing of the delivery plan was important, and it's important given that 2030 is not too far away, and we need to manage that challenge between what we need to achieve and the resources we've got to achieve it. We talked last July about the different groups that we could usefully engage with to help inform this refresh and to keep up to date. And we have been talking to the Town and Parish Council Climate Forum, and also we made use of the Parish Conference in October. And we let people know there that we were doing this refresh work and how they could engage. We've also covered our progress with refocusing the delivery plan, and I'll pick up a bit more on that and the themes and common threads that we are focusing on now. So looking at the delivery plan in particular and the work we've done there, currently the strategic objectives from the strategy, which are those colourful arrows that you can see on the screen, they have been what has sort of structured our delivery plan. Some of them are not really clear in terms of what types of actions that you might expect to find. So, for example, what might you expect to find by way of actions if you went to responsible economic growth and that part of our delivery plan? I don't know what your thoughts might be on that. And do these clearly cover everything that we're focusing on? So what about the natural environment and all the great work we're doing on biodiversity and habitat creation and addressing the ecological emergency? Where would you find those actions under those strategic objectives? It's not obvious. So that's one of the things that we want to try and solve. And so a move towards themes will help us address those issues and being a bit clearer. And then alongside those themes, we've identified some common threads that pick up on some other important things. So the themes that we have identified for sort of a new look delivery plan are coming up on the screen now. So energy efficiency, renewables, the natural environment, sustainable travel, waste reduction and recycling. So 4 themes that we are looking to then put our actions against. So the types of things you would find under energy efficiency and renewables will be our work across the estate to decarbonise some of our buildings, improving energy efficiency, adding to renewable energy generation where we can, so putting solar panels on rooftops, and also projects such as the solar farm near Graiseley, and working with our partners Veolia to look at solar energy generation at the Padworth site. So they all would fall under that theme. The natural environment, as we've picked up a lot on already tonight, that would include things, work we're doing on biodiversity net gain, the local nature recovery strategy, and everything we're doing under the ecological emergency and the development of green and blue infrastructure framework. So lots of things that would fall under that theme. Sustainable travel, as you would expect, typical things under there, and our new local transport plan that is emerging, active travel actions, encouragement of sustainable travel, our bus and rail services, and also the work to decarbonise transport and our delivery of EV infrastructure. And then waste reduction and recycling, actions to reduce waste, increase our recycling, and picking up on our commitments to composting, the changes to curbside collections to meet required UK government standards. That would all be under that theme. So alongside those themes, we've identified some approaches that are common, and some themes and threads that go across all of those 4 that we've just looked at. So they're on the screen now, and so I'll just pick an example: health and well-being. That is relevant to a number of those themes. So obviously under sustainable travel, if we're being active and engaging in active travel, that's good for our physical and our mental health and well-being. Spending more time in nature and some of the actions under the natural environment theme are really important for health and well-being. And then energy efficiency, it will help us to address fuel poverty and maybe problems with health when people living in homes that are not energy efficient. So things like that will cover a number of those themes. So that is how we're trying to arrange our focus and our actions in the delivery plan. When I spoke in July, I think I gave an example of one of the energy efficiency and renewables themes. So I've just pulled out something from the natural environment to show you what types of things you'll see in the delivery plan. So there's an overarching action, develop and implement a strategic approach to the creation of natural capital across the district. And then there are 3 specific tasks that you'll see on the screen there that all help to deliver that overarching action. And as we go through and deliver, we can add more specific tasks if opportunities come up to help deliver that overarching action. And as we achieve certain tasks, they will fall away. So there'll be a fluidity around the delivery plan, and we can add things and then make it clear where we've completed actions. So you'll see very familiar themes there in those specific tasks around the green and blue infrastructure framework, picking up on our work with the Natural Solutions Delivery Partnership. And then we've heard about it already this evening, the local nature recovery strategy and our part that we play in that. One of the other key things that we're trying to achieve through the refresh and something new that we are looking at is our pathway to net zero. The council has an ambition to achieve net zero for its activities by 2030. And what we are doing through this refresh is looking at the projects that we have got planned and that we're working on, and what that will mean for our carbon footprint in the years to come, and how close that will get us to net zero by 2030. There's not many councils that are plotting their pathway to net zero. It's quite tricky. We were hoping to learn from best practice, but there's not many examples out there. But we will be using some critical friends to check our approach and some of the assumptions that we are making along the way to ensure that they're reasonable and they can stand up against scrutiny. So that's something that we are busy doing. And some of the projects that are going into into that exercise are on the screen. A number of them you'll probably be familiar with that we're engaged with and are planning to deliver. A lot of these projects take quite a few years to lead into and actually see some delivery, but we are getting close to delivery on a number of these. And so we will start to see them having an impact on our carbon footprint as a council. One piece of work that's quite new that we've done is looking at the carbon sequestration that is taking place on council-owned green spaces. And that all feeds into our overall picture for carbon across the district. Next steps will be that we can update you further at the next open forum of this meeting, and that's on the 31st of March, so we can give you another progress report on how things are going and hopefully show you a little bit more. And then we are aiming to present the refresh to the executive on the 22nd of May. So I'm really happy to answer any questions, and there are also colleagues on the call that can help as well. It might be interesting to know from you whether you sort of agree with some of the key elements that I've outlined in terms of what the strategy refresh is going to include. And also, and importantly, if there's anything that you would expect to see us doing at this stage that you think might not be included.
Thank you, Jenny. And just before I open the floor to questions, and it's just a couple of points for me, really. I think first off, on the pathway to net zero, that's a really critical piece of work. I know it's a huge chunk, but I'm really proud that we are one of the first, if not the first, local authority to actually take the time to review how we get there and what we're doing on that journey, and looking across our estate, whether that's our green estate, our building estate, our natural assets, our man-made assets, and looking at how we can make them work for us to hit net zero in the right way. So I think it is a huge undertaking, and thank you to you and the team for the work on that. And finally, just a quick plug, because it links back to one of the themes that you shared, Jenny, which is around today we launched our curbside recycling of pots, tubs and trays. And that's well ahead of the government kind of mandated time frame of the 31st of March 26. So we're over a year ahead of that, and that's brand new information today that we can start doing that from tomorrow. So if anyone's out there and you've got your recycling going out tomorrow, put your pots, tubs and trays, and then it'll get collected at the curbside. So huge step forward in our curbside recycling, and again reducing our waste and making the most of it in terms of recycling. So just a quick plug there. So thanks very much for that. Using chair's privilege a little bit. Councillor Vickers, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I was going to ask about how we're progressing towards net zero, which I think is what you're trying to say with the pathway. Because how do you know when you're there? I mean, 2030 is no time really, and it seems are we confident we're going to get there? I can't sort of see that it's going to happen by 2030. Is that a realistic deadline? And obviously you're trying to find out how we can calculate where we are. I mean, obviously you can look at your own buildings to see what you're doing, but it's really very difficult to actually calculate where we are on that pathway. But it would be good, for the public and us to know what's being achieved and what we're doing. Everything is part of it, and it all sounds good. Although on the ground, I think we still know we haven't got enough little things like we haven't got enough EV charging points, or how are people travelling. So all those specific things. I mean, when you see things in your neighbourhood that you've wanted and they suddenly happen, then you think, great, we're getting there. I mean, recycling is good, and it's good that that's progressing, and that's a big positive, not just because it encourages more people to do it, but it means you're not making all those journeys backwards and forwards to the tip, which can't be anything but a positive. But and what are we doing? The climate forum is good, which I attend, and we had quite more people seem to be attending from the parishes. I wondered if we're using that enough. How can they help us achieve? Are we telling them what we think they could do for us? And with schools, should we be having some more engagement with schools, encouraging them to have debates on the future, because it's their future. So, yeah, anyway, thank you for your work so far.
Okay, thank you, Martha. I'll come back on some of those points if that's okay. So what we are working on at the moment is to get to a point where we can exactly share what you've asked about and what I know a number of residents and community groups are interested in, and that is how are we doing on that pathway to net zero, and are we going to get there? So what we are doing is looking at the council's impact and our own carbon footprint from our activities and tracking that and plotting the projects that we've got planned through our delivery plan and what impact that will have. So hopefully when we get to the next open forum meeting, we'll be in a position to be able to share that with you. It's in development at the moment, but what we're not doing is plotting the district's carbon footprint and how we're doing on that, because that's a lot of that is completely outside of our control. However, we are doing the actions that we can as a council to influence that and ensuring that things, for example, like our local plan policies, are as good as they can be for encouraging the district's position in terms of net zero. You mentioned schools and how we are maybe engaging with schools. There is a day planned at the Living Rainforest in partnership with the Trust for Sustainable Living and Reading University on the 10th of February, where we are offering a fully funded day to engage with schools and help them with their climate action plans, which is an ambition from the Department for Education, that they all have climate action plans this year. So we're trying to engage there, and we've got a number of schools signed up for that. But if anybody on this call has got links with their local school and would like to find out how they can sign up for that, then we would be really pleased to share that, because I think it's going to be a really good, helpful and interesting day. A number of contracts are in place. Well, a couple of contracts are in place in terms of delivery of EV charge points, which is something else you mentioned. And we are out to tender for another contract, which will see more delivery across the district. So we're working really hard on that to try and get as much out and delivered as possible, where we can influence things.
Thank you.
Marvellous. Any questions, Councillor Culver?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Jenny, for that update. Very useful. With regards to the blue-green infrastructure framework, do we know what timetable we're working to on that? And is it going to be integrated into the local plan? Because I think it's something that we've been obliged to do for a number of years now, and we haven't quite got it over the line. And then regarding learning from other councils, I find it hard to believe that there aren't councils out there that we could learn from. I mean, in the scrutiny sphere, for example, we draw on best practice from Local Government Association, Centre for Governance and Scrutiny and others, and we can learn quite a lot from them. So are there actually networks out there of councils that are working on environmental projects and officers that are hoping to learn from one another and share ideas? That's the second question. And just one final point, Chairman. You used the example of the Natural Solutions Partnership. When it comes to having measurable targets in the report, are we going to make sure that that lists the projects that we're doing with them rather than just the fact we're working with them? So, you know, proper smart targets, because obviously just working with somebody is not a target as such, if you know what I mean. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for those questions. The green and blue infrastructure framework, and Emily might come in if I don't cover the correct points here, is something that we've been working on in the background for a while. We had to pause because of resource issues, but we are picking that up again now. So there's quite a lot. It's quite well developed, and you're right, it does link in with the local plan, and it's something that we're committed to doing as part of the delivery and support of that local plan. Emily, do you know what we might not have exact timetable for bringing that through to executive just yet, but we're picking it up, and we'll be. I don't think it's going to take too long to bring something meaningful, and we'll bring it back to this forum actually, before it goes through to any sort of approval or sign off. But I think you haven't seen anything, but that's not because things haven't been happening, and we're picking up on a large number of teams across the council. As you can imagine, that would feed into that. We've had a lot of buy-in, so it's quite a large officer group that have contributed to where we've got to so far. Emily, do you want to come in before I move on to the learning from others?
Yeah, just to add to that, thanks, Jenny. Yes, we're working on in the background with it, and we're talking to planning colleagues around the specific green and blue infrastructure guidance that needs to be done to support the local plan review. So that's something separate. So the green and blue infrastructure framework will kind of guide our principles as a council, and there'll be a separate document to support the local plan review, but we're talking to planning colleagues about that.
Thanks, Emily. In terms of learning from others, apologies if that came across maybe a bit incorrectly. We do a lot of networking with others, and we do a lot of learning from others, and there are a number of groups that we're engaged with across a whole range of topics. APSI, for example, is brilliant place for us to learn from others. There's lots of groups around nutrient neutrality and biodiversity net gain that we've been working really closely with, where I was indicating that there's maybe not many examples, and we haven't found examples of councils that have actually got a graph plotting this is where we are and this is how we are reaching net zero. So there's lots of maybe infographics out there saying the types of projects that they're doing, but in terms of representing it on a graph, which is where we are hoping to get to and what we're working on, we haven't seen lots of examples. So that's what I meant by not much there for us to learn from in terms of best practice, just in terms of how to represent your carbon footprint on a graph and how you're getting there and different things that are feeding into it. But yes, we are very engaged with others and learning from best practice across a whole range of topics. Definitely. Was there a third point?
Yes, thank you for your answer so far, Jenny. No, that's fine. So you outlined about the work with the Natural Solutions Partnership. When it comes to our objectives, is it actually going to list the projects that we're working on rather than just saying we're working with X?
Yeah, so I think in the delivery plan, it's quite tricky in the delivery plan to represent maybe all the information that people would be interested in. And I forgot to say that within the delivery plan, there will be information on timescales, the expected carbon impact of those projects, and whether it is focused on the council's pathway to net zero or the district's pathway to net zero. And where there is more information that you're alluding to, we would look to put a link in the delivery plan to another page hosted on our website where you could then go and look at the details of those projects. So, for example, where we mention delivery of Graiseley Solar Farm, there'll be a link in there to take you to a page where the latest on that project should be represented. So we would do the same thing for the Natural Solutions Delivery Partnership. We would have a link in there to the page on the website where it talks about that partnership and what that's focusing on at that point in time. So hopefully that will tie up the links to those that want to know a lot more detail, but then those that just want an overview will get that overview from looking at the delivery plan. But any suggestions on how we can improve that and how we can improve the information and the targets that we're setting? Obviously, the delivery plan is a live document and we want to keep improving that. So we'd welcome your feedback on that.
Thank you. Any other questions from around the room or online? No. Okay. Any glaring omissions, folks? I guess from what you've seen tonight, and obviously it will come forward into the public domain properly in May, leading into May, so there'll be more opportunity to review it then. But I'm keen to hear feedback on it because this is a critical piece of work, and a lot of work's gone into it thus far, and want to make sure we get it over the line in a good way. Councillor Vickers.
Well, maybe this isn't where it belongs, but I'm just thinking about ongoing work with water quality and Thames Water. Does this fit in to the strategy? Because obviously we've done quite a lot there, but there's still, a lot to do to keep them on target and to make sure, that we get good water quality. Is that?
Top of my head, I believe it's in the council strategy as a kind of overarching document to work with Thames Water and ourselves. If I'm correct, I'm 99% sure it's already in there, but it might be something that I don't know if it's appropriate for the green and blue infrastructure, Jenny, to talk about water quality in there and capture it in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is included in the delivery plan in terms of that area of work. So it should be covered. And like you say, it's in the council strategy as a specific action.
Thank you. Pat, Dr. Pat.
Thank you. For your 4 themes, is there a reason why there's no mention of food? Because food's probably the largest contributor to carbon emissions.
I think it's not in there explicitly. We don't have, again, it's not something that the council is in control of. It's not our business to do that. But I think in terms of policies in the local plan and protecting agricultural land, that's in there in the local plan, and we wouldn't have anything in the environment strategy that would seek to go against protecting high quality agricultural land for food production. But it's not a key plank of the environment strategy. It wasn't in 2020, but there are those protections in there through the local plan policies. And we have been looking at and inviting topics around that. I think we had one at one of these meetings recently in terms of how locally we can encourage local food production in communities on a small scale and contribute to the overall picture. But if you've got examples of how other people are addressing that, we'd be interested in that. But it's not a key theme for the environment strategy. So it's not currently in there as a main plank.
Is it something that's relevant for schools to possibly educate people about the importance of a plant-based diet?
I don't know what schools do in terms of the curriculum. We work with schools and encourage them to engage in the Eco Schools programme. So it's probably covered in an aspect of that in terms of healthy eating as well, and growing your own. And I know that some schools have looked at, and do look at how they can use their school environment, and where possible, look at opportunities there.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just want to think it through. It's an interesting topic, and I think it's one where it's worth educating on, isn't it? And it'd be interesting to see whether it comes through perhaps in the climate action plans for schools that the DFE are kind of asking for. And perhaps it is around educating and giving all of the facts around these topics, but perhaps that might be something that can come forward at the kind of away day at the, I was going to say Riverside Centre then, Living Rainforest, too many centres in my head, as a potential topic for them to discuss and see. It's an interesting one. Yeah, I've not considered, because it is a bit, it's not directly within the council's control, but it is around that education piece, potentially on at least giving people the facts to make a choice. For sure. That's good. Thank you.
Eco schools, when a school is aiming to be an eco school, would that be part of its whole setup, or is that more to do with sustainable travel? And
Jerry?
because we've got quite a few eco schools, haven't we, or people wanting to be eco schools?
Eco schools cover a whole range of topics. I think there are 10 themes under the Eco Schools programme, and it touches on water and travel and energy, the whole range of topics that you would expect under sort of the sustainability theme. So it's really wide ranging, which I think is why it's so attractive to schools, because it picks up on a whole range of points from the national curriculum. And gives them real scope to do what they can do within their particular circumstances, because you don't have to do something under every single theme in order to get the status. I think you have to do a certain number out of them. So there's plenty of scope in there, and it covers everything that you would expect it to cover.
Cool, marvellous. Thank you very much, Jenny. Excellent. So moving on to item 6, which is a question from Dr. Pat Watson with regards to fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Did you have slides, or did you want to just talk us through the background?
Literally just going to ask the question. The question is, would West Berkshire Council endorsing the Global Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty support your aims as stated in your environment strategy?
Cool. Thank you for the question. I know we've been looking forward to bringing it to EAG, and I'd be interested to know members' thoughts as well. I've obviously done some consideration of this, and what I'm going to do is take it back to the rest of the executive and discuss with them. But I do think, I think what I would like to look at doing locally is, at the very least, look to get underway writing to our 2 MPs to lobby them on this topic, as well as the Environment Minister. And I think for me, as part of answering the question more holistically with the rest of the administration, is actually look at that locally. What can we do with regards to this topic in light of things like the environment refresh and so on and so forth? I think it's really keen for me to find a way of how we link this question back locally, as well as do what we can to lobby nationally with regards to our members of parliament and our ministers of state, etc. I think the spirit of the request and the question is absolutely right, but again, for me, it's just linking it back to our pathway to net zero and our wider strategy. So I'll absolutely take it away and come back with a proper answer in a full and informed way. But I do think there are definitely things we can do in the meantime locally to raise the topic and raise the kind of priority of it with our national politicians, and make sure we get some traction from them and it doesn't slip off the agenda more generally. So thank you for that. But I will come back with a proper answer for you in the kind of medium term, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for bringing it to EAG. And members, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or feelings around it whilst we're together. This is an advisory forum after all, and good for some discussion and feedback.
Does everyone know what the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is?
Well, we thought you might have given us a bit of background about it. I mean, it sort of stands, I imagine, you know, it's in what it says, really, but it's, what we're doing to provide alternative energy as well, I suppose. And making.
Imagine it is similar to the Montreal Treaty on the CFCs, where scientists said that the CFCs are causing a problem to the ozone layer. And so at that time, the scientists' advice was accepted, policies were put into place, and now the hole in the ozone layer is starting to close. So it's sort of based on the same ethos as that sort of treaty. It's made up of 3 pillars. The first is to stop expanding fossil fuels. The second is to fairly phase out existing production, and the key word there is fairly. And the third is we need a globally just transition to clean energy, because it's important that we realise that the fossil fuel economy is failing to provide affordable, reliable energy for people all around the world. And so we've got to consider the situation globally.
Thank you. And I think there's some really good things we're obviously already doing locally on this topic around things like Graiseley and, allowing us to harness the solar energy. We're looking at Padworth at our waste site, which is kind of a big user of energy. We've already switched to a blue tariff in our energy for our assets at the council. So we're already doing things in our own backyard to move away from fossil fuels, and obviously it's a key part of what we're trying to do in decarbonising our operations. Volker, our highways kind of term contractor, are doing loads of great stuff. That's quite intense, can be quite intensive in terms of carbon, and they're doing some great stuff around reusing existing road materials to look at how they reduce their carbon impact, which is really positive, and we've got a great relationship with them. And so there's already things we're doing locally, or in terms of moving away from it. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and one, like I said, I'll take away and give you a proper response to once I've considered with the rest of the exec. But for me, it's key to look at what we're doing locally and how it links to that to make sure we're doing the right things and moving in the right direction. Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously it's mainly about production, isn't it? And therefore, I guess you're mainly looking for a statement from the council to back any national position on it, rather than consumption, which is separate. So, and maybe you're aiming at councils also that are considering, I don't know if any councils considering putting fossil fuels in anywhere, but clearly this one isn't. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's primarily about production.
It is. It also links to your current environment strategy, which says that the council calls on the government to provide the council with the powers and resources to make your targets possible. Do you feel as if it'd be easier for you to meet your net zero target if you had different policies from the government? And I know that we've had a change of government since the environment strategy was written. I certainly think, notwithstanding that we've had a change of government, but I think you've been held back by some of the policies of the previous government.
And I would come out and always bat for more funding for local government to deliver these kind of things locally, because I think it's okay when you talk about trying to do big scale projects, like the kind of new government wants to do. But actually, I think it's as important to look at all of the smaller bits and allow locals to make those decisions in the right way. For example, look at our biggest emitting areas are like leisure centres and schools, for example. So actually looking at how we ramp up decarbonising those. We've got some great work going on at a couple of leisure centres, and which would be really positive. But actually, a lot of our schools are quite old, and it's retrofitting that work that's really expensive. Ramping up the pace of that, I think, is critical. But going back to the question of it requires more funding and bigger chunks of commitment longer term from government, which we're probably not seeing yet. Because we've got the power, we know our state, we know where the opportunities are. It's having the amount of funding to be able to deliver it consistently and sustainably, which I think is key. And I think that for me is where I would ask central government for, is more money to deliver these schemes. Susan.
Thank you. Another area where the district council does have some control and power is over planning for new builds, and it's increasing the specifications for increased insulation on new builds, particularly, and solar power to a lesser extent.
Jenny, off the top of your head, can you remember what the local plans got in with regards to insulation and solar panels, etc.? Because obviously it is quite heavy on a lot of the environmental focused items. Oh, can you hear me, Jenny?
Sorry, I could hear you. Yeah, I just couldn't find my button to respond. We have a policy in the local plan that seeks to ensure that we have net zero development. So that includes the use of solar panels or and renewable energy generation. So there's a policy around energy efficiency for new development, around domestic and also non-domestic development.
Thank you. Councillor Cartier.
Yes, it's a bit off topic, not related to what we were discussing. Well, it is not completely off topic. You did mention Graiseley, and as this is like an open forum, I must comment on that this is to do with putting more solar farms in Graiseley. They are the message I hear from them, and it's going to sound like not invented here, or sorry, not in my backyard, but they seem to be with the place that all the solar farms go, and they agree that at least one of them, or one of them for sure, is on a brownfield site, and that's fine, but the others aren't. And it's so the fact you mentioned it, I think needs to be recognised that nobody can quite understand why Graiseley's getting all the solar farms in the patch. So it's just something to come back to. It's not directly related to the point I'm talking about, but
yeah, I mean, on that topic, my understanding is it really does depend on the grid connections and where they are available. Obviously, the national infrastructure is creaking under the desire to decarbonise with things like grid connections for things like solar, for things like wind, all of those bits that require even electric EV charging points. It's a blocker. And there must be a rich seam of grid connections in that area of the world, which is driving a lot of that desire to put solar PV into places like Graiseley. I think as well on that topic, we're very keen to look at how we make the best use of the land around the panels as well. I know it has gone slightly off piste here, but I think it's just worth highlighting that fact that we're not planning on just putting panels in. We're looking at the kind of BNG topic and how we can really lift the rest of that site to make the most of it. There is still the ability to graze cattle around it as well that we've kind of been exploring. So, it is a multifaceted project really that's really positive to bring forward. So, cool. I hope that answers some questions around that topic. Councillor Culver.
Yeah, I'll just say, Chairman, I welcome the fact that you were going to go and discuss this with your colleagues, because I know that in the past there has been some reluctance in this chamber from councillors to lobby national government about issues that they characterise as being national and not being anything to do with the local area. But of course, all national policies will affect us locally. And as we know, charities are always asking members of the general public to contact their MP and sign petitions and so on. So I think it would be remiss of us as a council to say that's a national issue, not a local issue, and therefore none of our business. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what your response is to Dr. Glover's question. And it's particularly important now, I think, that the new government seem to be pretty clueless when it comes to the climate, thinking that the third runway at Heathrow is going to be a good thing. And one of the reasons that the Chancellor of the Exchequer gave yesterday is because it will enable cheap flights for families, which I think is just one of many examples of how tin-eared the government is on climate and what an uphill struggle it's going to be for all of us who want to do something about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a good localist, I'm a big believer that we know our communities best, and we want to work with our communities to get the right outcomes. And this is another key topic where we can ask the questions of our national elected politicians to try and make a change, because I think you're right. I think there's a long way to go on the climate topic with the new government as well. Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Pat, for bringing that to us today. It's good discussion and exactly what this forum is here for. So thank you for that. Right, what's next? Oh, AOB. That was item 7. Anyone got any AOB? And I'm not taking your Graiseley question again, Nick, now in AOB. Kofi.
Sure, just a plug for our environment newsletter. We've got some information and a QR code which we want to put on the screen for the benefit of the wider community.
Can we circulate that with our towns and parishes as well?
Will do. Thank you, Chair.
Marvellous, thank you for that. Okay, cool. So that brings to the end the part 1 of today, so the public part of the open forum. So therefore, I need to take a vote that members of the press and public be excluded for consideration of items that are likely to be I can't speak this evening, sorry. Following items, as is likely, there would be disclosure of exempt information of the description contained in paragraph Schedule 2A of the Local Government Act 1972 and Section 10 of Part 10 of the Constitution. So I'm happy to propose that we move to Part 2. Got a seconder? Thank you very much. All those in favour? Marvellous. Thank you very much. In that case, I will ask young Sam to end the live stream. And unfortunately, thank you very much.